Testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, we think of these as the three primary sex hormones, progesterone and estrogen for women and testosterone for men. So you can think of one as like a Mac OS and one as like Windows OS, for example. Similar components, but set up kind of different. You need a personal trainer and an exercise regime and better discipline and all these different things. And then if the levels don't improve, then you should look at having it treated. But it's very clear that this is being suppressed for a reason.
Maybe first of all, just a background. What is actually testosterone doing in our body, in our brain? How important is testosterone for us?
So all humans have all sex hormones. So men have female sex hormones and females have men's sex hormones. We just have them in different ratios. Testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, we think of these as the three primary sex hormones, progesterone and estrogen for women and testosterone for men. Women need a little bit of testosterone, men need progesterone and estrogen, just in different amounts, and they do different things primarily in the biology. So you can think of one as like a Mac OS and one as like Windows OS, for example. Similar components, but set up kind of differently. So when it comes to testosterone in men, this is your primary sex hormone. And it's not just related to sexual function. Without sounding too esoteric, it's basically your life force. And it's your life force via multiple psychological in terms of how you feel and how you think and how you subjectively experience being alive, but also biological in terms of basically not breaking down and dying, but also being able to perform. So when we look at all the systems that testosterone interacts with, it makes a lot of sense why it leads to a therapeutic outcome for someone who's not doing well in various ways, shapes, or forms, because it kind of upgrades a lot of processes that break down in disease states, or it's protective. So the way that we often look at testosterone from an objective standpoint in terms of improving health is that in the right doses in healthy men, and delivered in the right way, and there's nuance to that, that's the science of it. Testosterone is protective against the four primary diseases of aging, which is cancer, dementia or cognitive decline, there's diabetes, and heart disease. Now, all four of these things will be, those umbrella things will be the thing that kill you unless something tragic happens. When we look at aging, it's basically these systems wearing out and breaking down over time. And part of what facilitates that, other than chronological time and wear and tear, is the decline of hormones that we get as we get older. Because we're very familiar with menopause in women, the ovaries kind of cark it at a certain point and stop producing all these sex hormones. And their risk of those four diseases of aging immediately goes through the roof. And that's very well known. And they also feel terrible. And that's also very well known. Men have a similar thing. It's just, it doesn't drop off a cliff as such. It's more a very linear decline over adulthood. So it reaches this critical point at some time, but when it's death by 1,000 cuts, it's difficult to pull that trigger. But what we see as these levels get lower, or if younger men are having lower levels, which is becoming more of a problem now, is that they are a lot less biologically and psychologically resilient to stress. And that shows up both day to day, but also where you end up in terms of your career, your family life, your hobbies, your general lived experience, but also the circumstances that come from that as well. Because stress resiliency, as you'd know from business, is extremely important for everything, not just business, but biological systems as well. If you've just started TRT, it is completely normal to feel overwhelmed and confused. There's a lot of new territory to cover, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I wrote TRT 101 so that you can have everything that you need to know in an instruction manual in one place that you can refer back to, that you can have all the questions answered before they even come up. TRT 101 is my best practice approach for TRT from start to finish, and it contains everything that you need to avoid all the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen come up in my clients over the last 5 years. You can check it out via the link below.
You mentioned there just sometimes younger men can have a bit of a problem with low testosterone as well. And this seems to be something that's a bit more frequent now than ever before. But why do you think we're seeing that today, that this decline in testosterone, and also seeing it showing up in younger men?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And it's something that when I first started my career, my big goal was to advocate for the awareness of TRT, because back then it wasn't really a thing. Now it's become a thing, which is fantastic, but now it's about advocating for doing it right. And doing it right in younger men when it comes to hormone replacement therapy is very different than in age-related hormone decline, because the root cause is different and the human is a different human. And most of the traditional approaches to hormone replacement therapy are for andropause, which is this age-related hormone decline. So when you're treating a man for an older aged male for hypogonadism, meaning low testosterone, you're basically taking him back to where he was before. So his biology has been here before. He's going back to how he felt when he was 20, 21. That's an easier adjustment for the body because all those systems have already been in place. The body has acclimatized to this before. If you've never drank caffeine in your entire life and you have a cup of coffee at 30 versus if you drank caffeine for most of your life and then took a break from it, it's going to have a different response and it's going to have a different adaptation period. So when it comes to these younger men, not only is it a different way that they have to be treated because you have to take into consideration that they're basically going through a second puberty because they've never had high levels in the first place. There's also going to be a psychological adaptation as well, maladaptive behavioral coping mechanisms. But the cause of this is often dismissed as, oh, it's because you're overweight or you're not exercising enough or you're not getting enough sunlight. And that is often true, absolutely. But it's not always the case. And you can absolutely see in blood work when someone's levels are suppressed, you can see the signal from the brain to the testicles goes down because the body focuses on survival. And if someone says, look, I'm drinking 20 standard drinks a week, I smoke a pack of cigarettes a day, I eat junk food and I don't exercise and I'm 130 kilos, you can say that's kind of what happens. And you need a personal trainer and an exercise regime and better discipline and all these different things. And then if the levels don't improve, then you should look at having it treated. But it's very clear that this is being suppressed for a reason. The other problem we're having, though, is we're seeing younger men coming up who are doing everything right and they have levels of an 80-year-old. And I believe, personally, and a lot of my colleagues are in agreement, that this is from what's called, like, the lifestyle factors are an issue. Obesity during puberty is a new problem, and I think that causes developmental issues. But the plastics, pollutions, and pesticides that we're chronically exposed to over a lifetime, especially in utero and then as babies, I would argue that my generation, I mean, I'm 32, like my generation and the younger generations are kind of like the test subjects of what happens when you give that to people when they reproduce. And we see this in animal studies. We see generational issues with, the endocrine system when they're exposed to these chemicals. And it's very clear that these endocrine disrupting molecules called xenoestrogens, which are like artificial estrogens that bind in the body with the receptor, are having many-fold higher effects in terms of estrogenic effects in the body. This can lead to a shutdown or reduction of hormone production, as well as issues with the receptors, issues with hormone-positive cancers. And I think that is something that is a big factor in why the younger generation of men are very clearly more feminized.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So if someone's listening to this now and they're thinking, yeah, look, I haven't had a blood test for a while, not specifically tested this, but I just wonder if maybe my testosterone levels are lower than they should be. Like, how would that be showing up for them? How would they, what sort of things would they be experiencing?
Yeah. So for a longer response to this, I've got a video on YouTube called the TRT Masterclass, where I kind of go through this for everyone, as well as an ebook called TRT 101, which also goes through this. So if people want to have a more in-depth answer, that's what it would be. In terms of how does it show up in the blood work, we're looking at a reference range, which is already lowered. So you'll often be within the reference range on paper, but you'll be symptomatic. And typically symptomatic presentation can begin in Australia. If you're looking at the lab tests, which are printed in picomole per liter, anywhere below a 300, sometimes below a 400, absolutely below a 200. This is where we see symptoms. In terms of what those symptoms can be, the problem with looking at it from a face value is that you basically have what I call feel like shit-itis, which is just general malaise. So fatigue, but also trouble sleeping, low energy, low motivation, low mood, depression, anxiety, lack of stress resilience, lack of enjoyment of exercise, erectile dysfunction, low libido. The problem is that there's a whole bunch of lifestyle stuff that can cause these symptoms, and there's a whole bunch of psychological stuff. There's also a whole bunch of nutritional stuff, cardiometabolic health, alcohol consumption. All of these things can cause these symptoms. So It's very important if someone wants to look into this, and this is the mistake that I see people making. And I'm not trying to make money for my clinic. My clinic was built because this is what's needed. So it's, people can go to anyone who's an expert in this, but you want to go to someone who they're talking about. But basically, someone needs to kind of do the human equivalent of a mechanic popping the bonnet of the car. So if you go to a mechanic and say, oh, my car's making this noise, he's not going to go, oh, that's this. Here's a replacement for this. I'll replace it. See you later. But that's how people are looking at hormones. And I understand that because they're not scientists and they're not doctors, but it's very important that you outsource this. And if we're coming back to business, you don't take on projects in your business that are extremely high risk, high reward that you don't know how to do. You outsource it. That's common sense. So when it comes to health, it's the same. So it's very important the doctor does the equivalent of the mechanic popping the bonnet, assessing everything, because that noise over here might be coming from this being screwed up over here, which is screwed up from that thing over there, and it's flowing through. Human body is the same. So comprehensive blood work of all the different markers in the body that make sense to test in relation to how you feel. And then a full assessment of how you're living, what you're doing, how you're feeling, your habits, your routines, your vices, your goals, your history. All of these things kind of have to be taken into consideration to say, is this a primary problem that is causing other issues, or are there other issues in how you're living or your health that are causing this that we need to fix so that the testosterone improves? Because if your body's pumping the brakes on something and you don't fix why it's pumping the brakes, you come in and pump the accelerator instead, that's like having something suppressing your production and then you're coming in and replacing it and optimizing it. That is going to lead to side effects. And that's what happens. People feel a bit better, but then they have these problems. And then they blame things like, oh, I'm overproducing estrogen or I'm overproducing prolactin. It's, yeah, you are for a reason. And taking a pill to try to cure those symptoms rather than addressing the root cause is what leads to a never-ending cycle of not feeling good and being unhealthy. So it's a bit of a process, but it's something that you identify a need for, you outsource it to a professional. They have your best interest at heart. They're not just trying to put you on a program and sell you shit. And that's how you investigate it and take care of it.
Stop doing all the things you know you shouldn't be doing and start doing all the things you know you should be doing. If people are looking for where to start, it's that. Testosterone is what creates confidence. It's what gives the capacity for leadership. It's what drives the ability for one to become courageous and competent in their skill set. If you go on TRT and then live a lifestyle that you would never have those levels in the first place, your blood's going to get really